Hi, Richard. Welcome to The Sound.
Thank you, John. How are you, man?
Very good. A little toasty warm this week, but, that's how it is.
Yep.
Okay, look, you have a memoir, I guess you would call it, a book called Stories to Tell, and a Greatest Hits and More compilation called Stories to Tell. And they sent me the book. I didn't make it all the way through yet, but it is a page-turner, and it's really well written. Did you hunker down and really write this yourself, Richard?
Oh, well, thank you so much. And yes, I did. I did not have anybody help me with the book. No disrespect to people who use co-writers or ghostwriters, but yeah, it was a really great experience for me as a writer because it was such a totally different experience than writing songs, which I've done my whole life. And I wanted it to be a page-turner. I wanted it to be a really fun read in that I tried to write it in a way that would be the same as if you and I went to get a beer somewhere and I just told you some funny stuff that had happened to me in my life.
Yeah, totally. It's very conversational, very natural.
Yeah, that's the way I wanted it to be. So I really appreciate that you like what you've read so far.
How did you remember everything? I mean, are you somebody who has kept notes along the way, or did you just do a deep dive into your memory? How did you do it?
No, I didn't do drugs in the 80s.
Well, that's how you do that.
My memory's pretty intact. There were a couple of things that I wrote about where, especially when it came to conversations that I was trying to replay in my head, where, maybe it wasn't word for word because it's totally based upon my recollection of it. And there were a couple of times where a specific point in the story or a name that needed to be mentioned, I reached out to a couple of friends from that time, saying, hey, I remember it this way. This is right? Because I didn't want it to be, if someone said to me, whoa, dude, that's not what happened.
Right.
Then I would want to hear that. But that, I think my memory's pretty intact. And so many of these stories actually, this will make sense to you, John, is that so many of these stories are stories that I've told people throughout my life. So that's probably one of the reasons that they've stayed fresh. That's kind of what the basis of the book was. It really came from the stories that I started telling people when I started doing a solo acoustic show years ago, like 8 or 9 years ago. And the stories that I would tell and still tell are funny because they involve really funny circumstances. So when the audience cracks up laughing at a story, to me, that's like, oh, well, it's probably something I should put in the book,
That's funny. It's almost like a stand-up comedian going, oh, they like that joke. I'll keep that one in.
It totally is. And, it's funny because I was saying to my wife not too long ago, over the years of me, when I started doing the solo acoustic show, because it's just me and a guitar and a piano and that's it,
Right.
And so I talk a lot in the show. And I've developed these stories, and I also love when the audience yells things out, and it's a really interactive, fun night of hanging out with the audience. It's not a serious singer-songwriter show. I don't ever sit there and go, this is what I was going through when I was writing. It's like, dude, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Entertain me. Like getting people to laugh at what you say is a challenge, and it's a great reward when they crack up,
Right. You dive right in at the beginning of the book with this harrowing story of a mystery ailment that nearly brought you down, although, like a true showbiz pro, you went with the old adage, the show must go on or champs play hurt or whatever, and you kept doing solo performances with 104-degree temperature. Did you ever figure out what that was? I didn't make it to the end yet, so I don't know if you reveal it, but what was that ailment?
The answer became no answer. And the illness that I talk about in the beginning of the book came back about 6 months later, so last May or so. And the second time it was it lasted a lot longer. And I ended up going through about a month and a half of tests for everything that all came back negative. But I kept maintaining this fever. And anybody who knows anything about this is that once you've had a fever for more than a week or so, especially I was into like my 5th week of having a consistent fever. That's when the possibilities become really scary. And then you have to start being tested for things that are really possibly life-threatening. And so it was a really scary time. But the good news is that's a year ago. I feel so good. I feel 100%. My health seems to be perfect. And the only drag is that to this day, we don't know what it was that came to get me a couple times. I hope it stays away.
Wow. Crazy.
Well, John, I'm hoping that, I was joking this morning. I never thought about it. In me writing about it in the book, maybe somebody will read it somewhere and get in touch with me and go, dude, I know what you had. You had blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that could very well. Yeah, the same thing happened to me, and this is what it was. Yeah, cool. Yeah. I have to ask you about your Lionel Richie connection, because this is a radio station that plays a lot of Richard Marx and a lot of Lionel Richie. And so this is a fascinating relationship that I never knew about until I read it. As you say in the book, I mean, much to your own surprise, I think at the time, you sang backing vocals on a lot of Lionel's songs. And you tell a great story about how you kind of nailed the song You Are in the studio with him, and you helped him make it work.
Well, I mean, he was looking for a specific sound that he was struggling to find. And he'd been working on that song for a while, for a day or two, just on background vocals. And I came to visit him. It was the first time I met him. He had been gracious enough to give me his number and say, and this is, he called me when I was starting my senior year of high school.
Jeez.
Because he'd heard a tape of my first handful of songs, and he was so encouraging and so complimentary and really encouraged me to move to L.A. when I graduated from high school. And that's what I did. And so he invited me down to the studio, and he just happened to be working on You Are that day. And he knew my voice from the tape that he'd heard, and so after an hour or so, me just watching this session, he was frustrated, and he pointed at me in the control room and said, "Come out here." And he tried me on this part, and it was the sound he was looking for. And that was it, man. I sang on a bunch of songs on that record, and I came back and sang on All Night Long on the second album and Running with the Night. And
crazy.
It's funny. Whenever I hear one of those songs on the radio, I make sure to tell everybody, that's me singing all night. That's me.
Right. That's the thing. That part. I mean, that's the part if you're just singing that song and Lionel sings all night long, and then whoever's in the car with you will go all night.
Exactly.
And that's you.
And now you can say that's Richard Marx.
That's crazy. Richard, I'd like to ask you, before I let you go, can you tell us something quickly about a couple of your songs that we play all the time, like just a little background or something you remember about creating it, like, for instance, Hold On to the Nights?
Well, Hold On to the Nights was a big battle that I had on my first album because the record company hated my production. They liked the song. They felt like it was a hit song. But in 1987, if you had a ballad, it had to be a big power ballad. And Hold On to the Nights doesn't become that until the very end of the song. It was inspired by Peter Gabriel and some of this music that I was listening to that was more spacey and ethereal. And I had a real vision for it as the producer of that song. But it almost came to blows. And it was like the record company was threatening to keep it off the album, and finally they just said, well, okay, well, fine, we'll leave it on the album, but you just blew it, man, because it's never going to be a hit. And it went to number one. It was my first number one single.
I hope somebody at the record label ultimately said, Richard, you were right all along.
No, that doesn't happen.
No, they don't say that, do they? No, and what about Right Here Waiting?
Well, Right Here Waiting, I wrote in the middle of my first tour. And I was still dating the woman who became my first wife, Cynthia. And she was away she was an actress. She was in Dirty Dancing and Flashdance. And she was away doing a film in Africa while I was touring. And we couldn't see each other for like 2 months. And it was a tough time in a relationship, And so I wrote that song in about 20 minutes, just really sort of out of heartbreak and missing her. And I felt that it was way too personal a song to put on the album that I was making. Plus it was too soft. Like I was making a rock album. And so I had decided not to include it on the album. And at that time, Barbra Streisand came looking for a song. She asked me if I had anything for her. And so I thought, I'll give her Right Here Waiting. And and we joke about it to this day because we've been friends ever since and we have worked together. But she left me a voice message saying that she loved the music, but she wanted me to rewrite the lyrics because she said, I'm not going to be right here waiting for anybody, which is so classic Barbra Streisand.
Exactly.
She's not a victim of any kind. And so to this day, I mean, she is one of my dearest friends, but every once in a while I hug her and I say, thank you again for passing on my song because it's what made me record it. And included in the album, and it's the song that really changed everything for me.
That's funny. How do you feel about touring? Are you going to get back out there? I mean, people are starting to do it again.
I'm excited to say that I'm doing my first 5 shows at the end of August. If all goes well, I think they're all outdoor venues up in Northern California, and then I'm doing another 5 or 6 shows on the East Coast in October. But then I got my schedule yesterday, actually, coincidentally, for 2022. I start in February, and as of right now, I have 91 shows booked in 2022.
Oh, man.
All over the world. So Australia, Southeast Asia, Europe, all through the U.S., Canada, South America, and I'm going to be on the road nonstop. I can't wait. I feel like we're going to be really making up for some lost time.
Yeah, totally. Well, we can't wait to see you here because people love you in the Seattle area. And meanwhile, they've got a great book to read, Stories to Tell, and your new greatest hits package, also called Stories to Tell, the companion album. And I'm glad you're healthy, and say hi to your beautiful wife, Daisy Fuentes. And thank you for talking to us, Richard Marx.
I will indeed. Thank you, John. I wish you the best, man.
Thanks.
Take care.